I'd now like to introduce today's session. This topic, like all CAN topics, was suggested by a CAN member. It is called How to Build an Assessment Plan for Your Unit. Jackie Thomas, our presenter, is the Assistant Director for Assessment and Academic Staff in the Department of Residential Life. Jackie's a Cal grad who returned to Berkeley last year after working at sister UC campuses in the areas of assessment and student affairs. She has strong experience in departmental assessment, and I know we're all going to learn a lot from her presentation. So use the applause icon in your reactions to welcome Jackie. Take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Katie. Hello, everyone. I am really excited to be here today. So today, yes, I am going to talk about how you can go about building an assessment plan for your unit or your department. This is going to be a very interactive session. So you are going to need the chat box about every other slide. So don't close the chat. Please situate your screen so that you can see the slides and the chat box. And once you've done that, if you have not already, thanks to everyone who has already done so, but if you have not done already, please go ahead and enter your name, role, and unit or department in the chat. And while you are doing that, I am going to go over the agenda for this session. So once we get going in the presentation, I am going to review some basic assessment information, but I'm going to do it in a way that is relevant to unit assessment. I'll talk about what assessment is, what an assessment cycle is, and what ethical considerations should take place before doing an assessment. Then I'll pause for questions, and please enter your questions into the chat while I'm talking. Thank you again, Katie, for moderating the questions. From there, we're going to move into how to do a single assessment project, again, with an eye towards unit assessment. And finally, I'll spend the rest of my time with you today on how to do unit assessment and how to do it well. But before we jump in, I have a poll and something for you to do in the chat. So Katie, if you are able, please launch the poll. So the question is, how prepared do you feel to take on departmental assessment, with 1 being not prepared at all and 4 being very prepared?
DNAY, you're disconnected.
"40 people have responded."
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're going to give it maybe another 10 seconds for the last few people to have a chance to participate, and then we're going to show you the results. All right. So I'm gonna, perfect, thank you. So can everyone see this? There we go. Now you should be able to see. So we're mostly in the middle, it looks like. Some people have some feelings of preparation, and some people have kind of a lot of feelings of preparation, but it seems like everyone is here looking to hopefully leave more prepared. And that is also my goal. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this share. And then if you can go to your chat, I am hoping that you can all tell me what feelings come up when you think about unit assessment. And you can just put in, one or two words, or if there's a phrase, go for it. But what feelings come up when you think about unit assessment? See some chaos, frustration, accountability, daunting, critique, more accountability, important. It will take a lot of time. Oh yes, it can. Huge project, demonstrating value. Yes. Opportunity if done well. Being judged a failure. Yeah. That's definitely a reason people avoid assessment sometimes. Numbers and data being more important than qualitative feedback. Well, we're going to talk more about that in October. Transparency, oversight. Relief at being able to give people a better understanding of your department and what you do. That is huge. Getting data that you can't do anything with. I'm going to give just another 10 seconds. Okay. So and what data points to measure? Yeah, that's definitely what we're going to talk about today. So there are a lot of justifiably positive and not positive feelings that come up when you think about assessing an entire unit. Sometimes accountability is exactly what individuals want. Other times that is not the case. People feel like they're going to be judged a failure, or the data is going to come out to show that they're not doing a good job, in spite of the fact that people on this campus work extremely hard, right? So there are a lot of justifiable feelings about unit assessment, and I think that of course, I say this as an assessment person, right? But the way to address those feelings is to be more involved with the process, to be as involved as possible with the process, and to participate when the person doing the assessment or the committee, hopefully doing the unit assessment, are asking for feedback and offering feedback, even if maybe they're not. So thank you for that. We're going to go ahead and dive into the presentation. If you have questions, again, please put them in the chat box. So what is assessment? It's really important to know the difference between what assessment, what evaluation, and what research is. So first, it's important to know that you're taking the right action. And at the very base level of what assessment is, at the base, you are answering the question, what happened? More specifically, it's about figuring out whether the thing that was supposed to happen is the thing that actually happened. After that, you can get fancy. You can figure out to what degree it happened. You can figure out why it did or why it did not happen. You can even get information on what could have made it happen if it didn't happen. Now, for my more advanced assessment folks, you may want to take epistemology into account and even include it in your reports. Epistemology means ways of knowing, or more simply put, how you know what you know. So most commonly, we use a version of the scientific method where you identify a problem and collect data and move on from there. But you may also want to incorporate an expert's opinion or do some member checking, which means getting participants to tell you whether your interpretation of the data is something that they agree with or not. You can also use logic models. So again, if you are wanting to go beyond our, scientific method or modified version of scientific method to do assessment, you will want to think about epistemology and how you can know that the information you are collecting and using is valid. Research and evaluation are different from assessment, though. So again, it can be helpful to do these things in tandem with assessment, but it's important to know the distinction between what they are. So research is an attempt to create new knowledge that is generalizable beyond your specific context. Assessment only worries about your specific context. So I use others' research, or I do my own research through benchmarking in order to figure out what the standard is in my industry or what the best practice is in my industry when I approach assessment. So now evaluation, like this cartoon indicates, is about judging the value or worth or quality of something. So once you know what is happening through your assessment, you can evaluate to make decisions on things about whether a process is working, if you want to continue a program or not continue a program, if you should allocate more or fewer resources, if a staff member should be rewarded for their efforts or held accountable for something. Typically, assessment is done in cycles, and that can be done yearly, semesterly, monthly, or in some other amount of time that you deem appropriate. Cycles are used as a means for continuous improvement and for making sure that you are comparing apples to apples. For example, you don't want to compare spring usage to summer usage of your services without taking into consideration that there are usually fewer students on the campus during the summer, right? So you want to be comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges. So in order to establish a cycle, you need to know the steps involved. And the simplest steps that I like to use are feed the pig, weigh the pig, and feed the pig again. This helps me keep my attention focused on the main goal of my assessment. But if you want to be a little fancier, another good model for assessment for the assessment cycle is this Mackey and Bresciani's iterative model, where you center your assessment around the mission, goals, and desired outcomes, which we will talk about in much more detail later. And then once you've centered your assessment around these things, you are going to follow these steps of gathering data and using the data to improve how you do things. So in terms of ethics, on a base level, you want to do three things. First, you want to use the data you already have, and you only want to go out and collect data that you plan to use. It is unethical to collect data and have your participants stop what they're doing to give you information if you don't have any intention on using it. And just being curious is really not really a good enough reason to collect a bunch of data. You want to do more than be curious. You want to, be sure that you understand what's happening, that you have what you need in order to make good decisions in terms of evaluation, et cetera, et cetera. So use what you already have. And then if you need additional data, you go to your participants or different stakeholders and get that data. So the second thing you want to do is an inclusivity piece. You want to make sure your participants have everything that they need to do the assessment. So if you are assessing a group of staff who are not necessarily computer savvy or whose primary language is not English, you may want to provide a paper option, right? You may want to provide options in other languages. If you are if you are assessing a group of people who are computer savvy, you want to make sure that it's easy for them to participate, right? So you want to give them the correct link. You want to give them, you want to give them the correct link. You want to give them sometimes the QR code is what you want to give them, or a tiny URL so they don't have to type in a whole bunch. So depending on who your audience is, you do want to make sure that they are able to access your assessment. And then 3 is tell the truth and tell the whole truth. So if you are disappointed in your assessment results, that definitely happens. Simply just use your data to improve your operations. Don't hide data that you think makes you look bad. Say that 5 times fast. And also don't use only the data that makes you look good, or skew the data in a way that, makes you look good. The data's the data. Just tell the truth. And if there are places for improvement, you are assessing something important, hopefully. So it's important not to run away from the bad and towards the good. So some other considerations about ethics are constructing your assessment instruments so that, constructing your assessment instruments and your reports to mitigate bias. And you also want to honor the experiences of underserved or minoritized groups. And a lot of that is done through examining word choice, right? What words do you use to describe the groups? And also looking at the wording in some of the questions that you're asking that are outside of your your demographic data or your demographic questions. You also can examine your questions to see if there are any underlying assumptions. And just know also that it is ethical to share data and what you're doing with the data with your stakeholders. So you do want to report back to your stakeholders, to your participants, and let them know what you've done with their feedback. And then on a more advanced level, you may want to consider how your approach to assessment is affected by your own identities or life experiences, and then make necessary adjustments if there are any. And typically that is done by bringing others into the process. And you may also want to consider whether you've constructed your assessment in a way that tells you who is being included and who is not being included in your process and your services and what it is that your unit is doing. So there is a podcast which I've referenced on the reference slide called Socially Just Assessment. Yeah, that's right. Socially Just Assessment podcast. And they're in episode 2, there's a woman speaking. Her name is Krista Prince from the University of North Carolina. She studies critical theory, and she challenges in that episode this widely accepted idea that the only correct way to do assessment is to be objective and detached and value-free. She says that this is problematic if you desire for your assessment to have an inclusion or social justice lens. If that is not the case, then that is fine. But if you are hoping to do that with your assessment, then you may want to look for ways to explore different groups' experiences, or to ask questions that will help you understand how your participants are being affected by systemic inequities, power, privilege, and things of that nature. So I just wanted to offer that, and you can see that, you can see the link to the podcast in the references page. So I'm going to stop and see if you have any questions. Is there any questions so far? I don't see any in the chat. Repeat the name of the podcast. It is called, let me make sure I say this correctly. It is called Socially Just Assessment Podcast. And I listened to it through SoundCloud, and the SoundCloud link is on the reference slide. All right. I'm going to give it just a few more seconds, and then, oh, thank you, Katie. Um, I didn't get through all of Krista Prince's episode. So she may. The podcast is only 5 episodes, and would not say only, but the podcast is 5 episodes. And from there, they stopped production, and each episode has a theme. So the theme for that particular episode was critical theory and how to use it in assessment. The other episodes were on, I'm drawing a blank. Let's see. I have my SoundCloud right here, but it's a really good podcast. And that's not SoundCloud. Oh, perfect. Thank you. But I didn't get through all of that episode yet. I'm about halfway done with that podcast. It was really good. There was another one by a gentleman named Brian Bork. And he talks about social justice and assessment. That's episode 3. Episode 3 was really good. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, hearing none, we will move forward. And if you come up with any questions, please just put them in the chat. All right. So let's talk about approaching a single assessment project. So there are multiple ways you can go about doing this. And on this slide, I have 2 lists. On the right, there is a list of 11 assessment planning steps from a course that I took. And on the, nope, that's the left. Let me start over. So on the left is the list of 11 assessment planning steps from a course that I took. On the right is a worksheet that is provided in the book called Student Affairs Assessment Theory to Practice. And there's information about both of these on the reference slide. So I'm going to ask you to read through these in a moment. This is where we're about to start getting very interactive. But first, I just want to highly recommend that you use one of these or combine the 2 or create your own system so that you are sure not to forget to do something important. There is nothing worse than sitting down to write an assessment report and realizing that something is wrong with your data. If you have ever been in this situation, I know I have, you could set out to assess ABC and realize you've only asked questions about X, Y, and Z, right? You can also find out that you might not have permission to even share the data the way you assumed you would, and that puts a monkey wrench in your plans. So, a lot of things can happen when you skip steps. So again, I highly recommend that you select a system. So I am going to give you 3 or 4 minutes to read both of these lists. And when you are done, please go to the chat and tell me which steps you feel most comfortable with and which steps you feel least comfortable with. Go for it. Mm.
Wow. Post.
All right, and just one more minute.
Thank you for here.
Okay, let's take a look. So it seems like by far we are most comfortable. Can you see it? Do you see the slide or do you see the chat on your screens? You just see the slides, right?
We see the slides.
Okay, cool. Then I will not scroll and act as if you can see what I'm scrolling through. But I'm looking at the chat and it looks like by far we are most comfortable with identifying the purpose of assessment, which is actually a huge and important step. So that is good. And what are some other things that we are comfortable with? Okay, figuring out who to study. There's a number of people who are comfortable with figuring out what data to collect and how to go about collecting it. And then there's a group of people who are not comfortable with those exact same things. And of course, IRB. I don't think anyone is ever comfortable with IRB. So, yes. Okay.
Jackie,
Mm-hmm.
not everybody might know what IRB stands for or what that is.
Great. So IRB stands for Institutional Review Board. And when you are doing a certain level of assessment on human subjects, especially if you are asking about, usually when you're doing research, right? So especially if you're asking about like anything that would bring up a traumatic experience, you definitely need to go through IRB. If you are working with children and you want to do research and gather data from children, you pretty much always have to go through IRB. And then most research projects, those of us who have been through doctoral programs know you usually have to go through IRB if you are going to be collecting data in order to do research and create new knowledge. Okay. So yes, again, when you've gotten to the point where where you're sending something to IRB, it's usually a situation where you've put a lot of work into the project already and you're going to get permission to move forward with your project or not. And that can be nerve-wracking, those of us who have been through it, because you may have to go back to the drawing board, or you may have to make tweaks, or you may be fine. You never know which one it is until you hear back from them. Okay, I'm going to move forward, but thank you for participating. And if I am able to incorporate, I think that what I'm going to be talking about moving forward should address some of this. So give me 1 second to get back. Okay. So the reason I wanted to have us take a look at what it takes to do a single assessment project is because when you approach unit assessment, you need to keep that in mind, right? It is very easy to bite off more than you can chew, to get really excited when you are approaching unit assessment and you want to maybe assess everything. And considering what it takes to do a single assessment project well, you do want to be very strategic about what it is that you choose to assess. So, with that said, we saw earlier when we looked at the assessment cycle that things like the mission should be at the center of the assessment process. I am going to go over these 4 terms that you see on the screen here, and from there, we're going to talk about how to use them when you approach unit assessment. So, the mission is simply the purpose of your unit, or you can create a mission or find your mission by asking the question, what words are being used to describe why the unit exists. The vision is an inspirational statement, and sometimes it's an aspirational statement that tells everyone what your unit will look like when it is most successful. And then your goals or your outcomes are the end results of an activity, a program, or a service. And then we get over to the KPI. Most of us have heard mission, vision, and goal before. But KPI may or may not be a new term for you or one that you use very often, but they're simply your indicators for success. And that usually comes in the form of a few statistics or data points that let you measure your unit's progress against its vision or its goals. And KPIs are sometimes called measurements or metrics, and sometimes they come in the form of student learning outcomes. One term we use in my department is learning goals. So we are going to talk about KPIs a little bit more next slide. But I do want to talk about how do you start using the idea of mission, vision, goals, and KPI to start building a formal unit assessment plan. So if you're familiar with strategic planning, you know that creating a mission, vision, and goals are the outcomes of the strategic planning process. But for the purposes of this session, we are not going to go over how to do these strategic planning pieces. We are going to focus on what you do with them. So first step is don't do this right now, but the first step in this process is, opening up your Microsoft Word or your Google Doc, your Google Sheet or your Microsoft Excel, whichever you're most comfortable with. And you are going to put your mission and vision into that document. And it's okay, I think, if you have one and not the other. That is definitely the case in my department right now. And we will eventually get around to making the one that we're missing, which is the vision. but I feel comfortable because our mission is very well written with moving forward with creating a plan. From there, you want to figure out if your mission and or vision are a good representation of what your unit currently does, and maybe make some minor changes if necessary, but don't get stuck here. And getting stuck in this area right here is very common. When you're looking to make any tweaks to your mission or vision, be sure that you consider the mission or vision for your larger division, the mission or vision or strategic plan for UC Berkeley as a whole. And there may also be relevant things that the entire UC system is asking for from departments or units like yours, depending on what it is that you're doing. So you want to make sure that your mission or vision speak to the larger organization that you're a part of. And we'll come back to alignment in a little bit, but just know that at this first step, you do want to consider how your mission and vision, and eventually the goals and KPIs that you create are going to align with your larger organization, however you plug into them. So once you've done that piece, you're ready to make a list of all of your major services and processes. For example, in residential life, we have nighttime on-call services, which we call duty, where we handle anything that comes our way, from 8 p.m. lockouts to 3 a.m. medical emergencies. We offer a conduct process. We have follow-up procedures for distressed students who may be struggling because they didn't get into the major that they had, they'd always dreamed of, or they may be having mental health challenges and considering things like suicide, or we may have concerns that they may become violent to the community. So there's all of those high touch pieces and high touch services that we provide. And in addition to that, we have over 1,000 events that we offer to our residents so that they can attend. We offer tutoring. We hire and train over 200 students every year. And we have like family housing where we offer after school camps for the kids that live there. And the list goes on and on. Residential life is a huge operation, a big department, and we have several units within it, but you get my point, right? Like I have to go through once I am looking at my department's big mission or my department's mission statement and parse out what the major services that we provide to our students are, or to other departments. And then from there, I'm ready to figure out some other things. Is this making sense so far? I see some head nods. Okay, we're good. Okay, I know that was a lot. So once you have your major services listed or your major processes listed, you should determine if you already have goals and KPIs for them. And if you do, you want to determine if that needs to be modified at all. If they don't exist, you might need to create them. And I say might because you may not need to create goals and KPIs for every one of your major services or your major processes right away. And we'll talk about that a little bit later too. So you will want to prioritize and do chunks at a time, and that can be determined through alignment with strategic plans and your larger organization. My best advice is to keep it simple to start and then to get fancy after you have some success, because it is very easy to get overwhelmed and to move on to anything else that's, not assessment when this starts to get difficult. So I am going to give you 3 minutes to jot down on your own paper. Don't put this in the chat yet. We're going to build up to something else. But I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to jot down on your paper the major a list of major services and processes that your unit provides. Again, don't do anything with it yet. We're going to do it in a second. We're going to use it in a second. And I see a question on how do you determine how granular you get? And I'm assuming that's it with respect to listing your major services. That's really up to you. So I'll give you an example. So for our conduct process in residential life, where students choose behaviors outside of our community standards, for our conduct process, there are three different ways that the students can participate in that process. So they can meet with one of our professional staff, and this usually depends on how egregious the thing is. But they can meet with one of our professional staff. They can do a restorative justice exercise, or they can meet with a peer review board, which are other residents, and the board determines like whether they believe they did the thing and what the student needs to do to restore the community. When I approach the assessment for residential life conduct, I'm not going down that granular to figure out how those different pieces are working. I am looking at the overall process, right? So regardless of which way the resident gets involved with our conduct process, what are the overall things that I need them to walk away from that process with? Does that help at all? I see some head nods, but okay, yes, wonderful. So yes, go ahead. I'm going to give you a couple more minutes to go ahead and make your list of the major things that your unit does. And again, residential life has many units, so I know I listed like 8. You may have like 3 or 4, and I've had 3 or 4 in past positions. It's just residential life is huge right now. Okay, so finish up your last thought, and then we will be moving forward. But hold on to that list because you are going to use it in just a moment. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit and then come back around. I want to spend a little bit more time on KPIs because they're really important to unit assessment. This is how if you do a good job with KPIs and creating them and assessing them, then you will be able to avoid getting overwhelmed. So if you look at this slide, the first three examples you see here are very academic affairs oriented. So they're trying to increase retention rates by 90%, or we're trying to get our student to faculty ratios down to 100 to 1. I'm not in academic affairs. I don't know if that's good or not. These are just examples I got from Cascade Strategies, also on the reference slide. And then the third one is we're trying to increase graduation rates to 80%. And there are definitely student affairs units that can adapt these for their purposes. And then the last two examples are us trying to increase usage of peer mentoring to so that 87% of our target population is using the services. And then the final one is trying to give students in housing a positive experience so that 85% of our residents report that they're satisfied with their experience. And again, these can be used for either academic affairs or student affairs purposes. Yes, KPIs do seem like SMART goals. Yes, that is a great way to think of them. Um, so now we're going to go back to this activity. You are going to take your list of services and just choose one. And what you're going to do is you're going to think about the goal of that service and then create the best KPI you can imagine. And once you do that, you're going to type in the name of the service, the goal, and the KPI in the chat. I'm going to give you an example. So let me put that in the chat. Take a look at it, and then there we go. So I've listed my service, I've listed the goal, and then I have a KPI. So the clock says 10:56. Gonna give a couple more minutes because I know this takes a lot of brain power. Thanks, Alfred. And then Astrid, is there an ideal date that you could imagine?
I don't know if you noticed, but my strength and weakness, my biggest weakness, or my, most feared area in this is the timeline, the start of the project to create the whole entire timeline. So yeah, that's always my biggest struggle.
That's completely understandable, especially when you're trying to get a paper published, because there's so many parts to that process that are not up to you, right?
Well, and just the fact of, okay, so here I am at the very start of the process. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of aspects in there that are out of your hands. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, in doing like what I proposed, what we do in those working groups, they may work for a while and never come up with something. So, I mean, coming up with a timeline to have something proposed, published and proposed, yeah, you may never get to that point. So it makes it a little more challenging.
Okay. So are you open
but I guess
Go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
I was going to say, are you open to feedback?
Yes, absolutely. That's why I'm here.
Okay. So I'm wondering if the KPI and the goal could maybe be combined to create, one super goal. And then from there, and I'm going to read it because I don't know if those who may be listening later on will have access to the chat. But anyways,
right.
So your service is determine a disease drug development process that can be streamlined. The goal is to have a working group that will create a new process that adheres to all of the regulations and is optimum for all parties. And then the KPI is a paper published and a new process proposed to applicable regulatory agency or pharma company. That is huge, right? Huge and important work. And I'm wondering if you may want to break this up a little bit more. And again, I don't know your industry.
Well, okay, so you were suggesting combining the goal and the KPI to create a super goal.
Mm-hmm. So you want
and so then what would my KPI be?
Right. So let me see. So in terms of publishing the paper, there are a lot of steps involved in that, right? So I would imagine that you...
Well, actually, now, did you see the study that just came out last month that the early shelter-in-place project or processes here in the Bay Area that influence the rest of the country saved 500 million, potentially 500 million people, and it's the largest global effort that's ever happened. I did a report on it for our intern journal club last week, but their timeline for getting it published, they proposed the project in March. They finished their study in April and had the first draft into Nature magazine in April, and then it was like published, I think it was finalized in the end of May, and then it was published June 8th, which is a crazy turnaround time.
Yes.
It is very fast, but if you're doing something that, falls along the lines of something that is incredibly needed, then I think now, more so than in the past, things like this can happen more quickly. So the publishing doesn't have to take forever.
Okay.
And we're also talking an article and a study, not a whole book or anything like that. So,
absolutely. So what I would say is, while yes, it seems like maybe the steps to getting published are maybe more in your hands, like the steps that need to be taken in order for the paper to be published are more in your hands than maybe some other types of research where papers are published. I'm just wondering if, for the purposes of your KPI, that you separate, you break up the milestones a little bit more, because your
okay.
KPI could be looked at as a goal. So let's just say, for instance, I know this may not be the case for your particular project, but a lot of the times when we're working to get a paper published, we have to first complete the research, right? Once the research is completed, we need to write a draft, and then figure out like where that manuscript is going, as far as like which journal it's going to go into, et cetera, et cetera. So considering the fact that your field and your project is very specialized, looking at it from the lens that I just described, I would recommend breaking that up just a little bit more so it's a little bit more attainable. Shirley said a little bit earlier with us that the KPI can be looked at as a SMART goal, and I think that's absolutely right. It's just that you have to make sure that that SMART goal addresses your larger goals, mission, vision, etc. So thank you so much for that, Astrid. I am actually going to move forward, and I also see that Justin Oliver inputted.
Thank you for the feedback.
Oh,
I appreciate
absolutely.
it.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
the different ways to frame things. And yeah, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And thank you for being open to the feedback. So I see here that Justin has an idea for how to go about making a KPI for study abroad reentry. I'm going to go ahead and read that, and then we're going to move into the next slide. So study abroad returnees will participate in career/reentry programming to understand how to articulate the career value of their abroad experience. These are some amazing goals that you all have today, I just want to say. So 50% of study abroad returnees will participate in at least one reentry program event after completion of study abroad program by the end of summer 2021. Okay. And I could imagine that there's a host of specific actions that would need to take place in order to make that happen. So wonderful. And thank you all so much for participating. I know that this is not the easiest activity to do on a Friday morning. So I'm going to move on. And I wanted to share this excellent example of how you can use alignment to prioritize where you are going to put your energy. So If you remember earlier in this session, I said that you need to make sure that your mission and vision align with your divisional and institutional goals. And then at another point in this session, I said that you might not need to create goals or KPIs for everything you do. And this example here is why. So this is the strategic plan for the Student Affairs Project team for this upcoming year. And in order to create this plan, right, I see you, Katie, right, raising your arms because this is a lot of work. Strategic planning is a lot of work, and they actually consulted 5 other strategic plans to create this strategic plan. So I just want to, lift up that they looked at the UC system-wide plan, UC Berkeley's campus plan, Student Affairs' divisional plan, as well as IT's plan. And then from there, they created the first 4 rows that you see here, which are their vision, mission, goals, and they even have some values there. And then from there, they created this 5th row. And you see the actions that they're committed to taking this academic year in that bottom row. So I want to give you all a few minutes to read this because it really is just a lot of work put into a clear, concise slide, right? And then when you get to the bottom, I want you to pretend that you are on the leadership team of the Student Affairs Projects team, and that they have come to you and said, look, we've done all of this great work, and we want you to tell us what KPIs we should strive for this year. So we just went over a KPI process or a learning process to learn KPIs for your own unit. And now I feel like you are all experts in making KPIs, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to come up with one KPI and enter it into the chat for their plan. And I'm going to put an example in the chat that you can use. And then I will go ahead and give you a few minutes to go ahead and read this and come up with your own KPI that they may be able to move forward with. And just one more minute if you are typing or about to type and formulating a thought. Go ahead and put it in the chat. Yes. Wonderful. Okay, so here are the ideas we have for the projects team. Oh, thank you. So we want to have a revised intake process in order to process COVID projects within 24 hours. That's very measurable. Let's see. We'll come back to that in just a minute. Create and publish a monthly newsletter to share the stakeholder story utilizing SA comms platforms or SA communications platforms. Okay. And then based on survey data, respondents will indicate an 80% satisfaction rate with the website being easy to use and clear. And then we have meeting with 100% of new members of the Student Affairs Cabinet by Halloween. So those are good. I would say that we have some things that are very actionable, and we also have some things that are measurable, right? And we have some things that are more about the measurement than the action, and some things that are more about the action than the measurement. If we're looking at, some of us, we have, a percentage in there, and some of us have something like a product that we're producing, like a monthly newsletter. So thank you for participating. And then there was a really interesting comment that came in about KPIs being difficult sometimes because units don't have benchmark data. And I will say, yes, you definitely want to look at, whatever the baseline is. You want to find the baseline for your organization, for your unit, in order to just imagine what is possible and to know what others have imagined is possible in the past. So if you are looking to figure out how easy your website is to use, for example, what information do you already have, right? Maybe you look at the number of visits that people make to your website. Maybe you look at, I don't know what all is possible because I don't do website development, but maybe you can figure out how many times people click on certain links on your website to determine if it's been useful and easy to use. So you may actually be able to pull some baseline data to see what is possible to measure and what is maybe easiest to measure as well. Because again, we want to keep this within the scope of an 8-hour day, right? And we don't want to be spending our entire lives just doing assessment because we all usually have more than one thing to do a day. But yeah, so those are things you want to take into consideration. You definitely want to get that baseline data and benchmark with other units that are similar to yours and institutions, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you. I'm going to move forward. Thank you for all of your participation in those activities. We have one more like poll to do, but all of the things that take all of that brain power are done. Before we move on, I wanted to mention that the Berkeley Strategic Plan is on the references slide. So you can take a look at it there. Now, I'm going to end with 2 tips for being successful with unit assessment. And the first is don't try to do it all at once. Create an assessment schedule for yourself. You want to consider whether it's necessary to do an assessment every semester or even every year. There may be things that you can assess every 3 years or even every 5 years. And if there are no outside pressures or mandates for data at certain times, and you're trying to figure out how often to assess something, you will want to take into consideration how long it will take the people who you're creating the data for to use that data and implement the changes. So that would be my guideline. So if you give someone a data set and you think it'll take them 6 months to implement, and then you can assess again, then maybe you assess in 6 months. If you think it'll take them 2 years to do, maybe you assess again in 2 years. If there is no mandate or request for it sooner or at a different time. So what you see on this slide is an example of an assessment schedule from Valencia Community College. And the first line item here says that they're going to assess how students use some software system, and they're going to do it every year. The second line item says that they are going to assess student engagement every other year. And then the third one says they'll assess the registration process every term. And I really like this assessment schedule because it says who is responsible for each assessment. It tells you the purpose of the assessment, and it also tells you what actions will help improve the assessment outcomes. All right. And then another thing you can do, this is the second tip, to be successful with unit assessment is building a culture of assessment. So you can do this by showing the value of continuous improvement, which means you can give people timely assessment reports. When people do something and they get their feedback right away, they are usually really interested in that feedback. So timely assessment can be really helpful to making people excited about doing assessment. You also can celebrate the successes when people, you can celebrate the successes when you either meet or make progress toward a goal. You can celebrate people's efforts when they contribute to a goal or help you with assessment. So there's a lot of celebrations that can happen, and it really could just come in the form of just saying like thank you in a office-wide email or something like that. Another thing you can do to build a culture of assessment is build assessment capacity by teaching people how to do assessment. People can be unenthusiastic, to say the least, about doing things like assessment when they don't know how to do them. And that's typically what I find is the reason. Sometimes people don't even know the things that they're doing is assessment, and they just need some encouragement and a little celebration. So here are the references and resources as promised. And then Katie, if you can launch that final poll. Okay. And then please let me know if you have any questions. That is it.
Could you go back to the resource slide?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And then feel free to unmute and ask any questions that you have. All right, and we're going to give it maybe 30 more seconds if you can participate in the poll.
Thank you both. That was a good session.
Thank you. Glad to hear it. It was helpful. All right. So it looks like we're leaning more on being prepared. That's wonderful. Yes, thank you all. I'm looking at the group chat.
Yes, let's give Jackie a big round of applause using our reactions button. Woo, there you go. This was a really great presentation, Jackie. Thank you so much. And it was good to see so many people's faces. That's always good for my feeling of community. I hope you still feel connected to this community. And I put the links to the different materials in the chat, but I'm also going to send that to the CAN listserv. And in a few hours, when I have the link to the recording, I'll also send that out to the CAN listserv. So feel free to share this information with your friends. And thank you very much for coming. And I hope you and your family are safe and well, and that you have a great weekend. Thank you. And if you want to hang on and ask Jackie questions, that's fine. We're going to hang out for a bit. Take care.